I'm just absolutely delighted to be here today with C Schindler and Chris Green, um, both of whom have been popular amongst the people who watch this channel. And for anybody who hasn't watched this channel and other channels in our surrounding constellation of channels, I'm going to ask the two of you to introduce yourselves to each other because I believe this is the first time you've met.
It is.
And
Yes.
and that will at the same time introduce you to our audience. And then I'm going to ask you one question before I sort of let you start um, down whatever path suits you. Okay. So maybe since you're on my upper left, David, I'll let you start.
Thank you, Karen. It's really a pleasure to be here again with you. You've got such an interesting set of friends. Chris, it's nice to meet you. So I'm David Schindler. I teach metaphysics and philosophical anthropology at the John Paul II Institute, where I've been now for about 10 years, a little over 10 years. I am one of the editors of the journal Communio, which is part of the Nouvelle Theologie or the Ressourcement movement in Catholic theology. And I work principally, I'm more a philosopher than a theologian. And I work principally in Catholic philosophy, very broadly speaking, with a big C and a little c. Interested especially in the classical philosophical tradition and how that tradition reinterpreted in faith, in the light of faith, can bear fruit in terms of contemporary cultural questions. I think that sort of characterizes most of my work.
It's good to meet you, David. I'm lucky enough to have read some of your work on Balthasar, and of course I know the journal, and it's really a joy to be with you today, and with you, Karen. Thank you. So I'm Chris Green. I'm a theologian and most recently a bishop overseeing our diocese. That's a story unto itself, not something that I expected. I was born and raised in rural Oklahoma in classical Pentecostalism, what I call sweaty Pentecostalism or sweat and blood Pentecostalism.
Okay.
And then along the way, during my studies and pastoral work, I found my way in the continuing Anglican movement, was ordained as a priest, and then again last year suddenly moved into this role. All along the way, of course, been teaching as well as pastoring, doing work in the academy and in the parish, and finding kind of the integration of the Pentecostalism I grew up with the larger tradition via Wesley. So it was a joint intellectual and spiritual journey for me. There was a way in which I've been lucky enough that those things have always been married. I have lots of friends whose spiritual lives and academic lives diverged, but for me, thankfully, and there's a lot to do with my wife, I've been able to stay integrated in that way, right? And it's led me most recently into, and what brought your name up for me again most recently, David, is finishing a trilogy in Christology, a dogmatic Christology, and I'm writing about Dionysius, which led me to Balthasar's account of his style, which led me again to your work, which I'd seen years ago, but came back to it again. So again, this is a real pleasure for me to be with you today.
Thank you.
Well, I'm very excited to hear what you two have to say to each other. I put out a call for questions because there are many of my viewers who know much more of both of your work than I do, although I do have a book from each of you. I have read and talked at some length with others about Love and the Postmodern Predicament by C Schindler. And I purchased and have read partly into Surprised by God by Chris Green. But both of you have a number of books. There is one place where there is a sort of a natural crossover, and that's in this area of beauty. And one of my viewers named Michael had a question for the two of you on this issue of beauty. So it's going to take a little bit to set this up. I apologize for that. So Chris, you have a book on beauty. I think it's called Beauty. Well, you can tell me.
All things
All things beautiful. All things beautiful. And and David, you have written Love and the Postmodern Predicament, and you've done a number of talks about beauty, and a lot of your work revolves around this relationship between beauty and love. So Michael says, I would be interested to hear them define what beauty is for them and its relationship to the good, and what role that might have to play in our current sort of postmodern, post-liberal phase that we're in right now. We have heard so much argument about what is good and what is true, and it does seem like there is something special about beauty that allows it to escape some of the postmodern critiques. It seems to have a groundedness or an immediacy that is able to get past even our most cynical defenses. And then he brings up this thing that Dostoevsky said, where beauty will save the world. And then he has a long quote from Solzhenitsyn about that, which I'm going to pass over right now. Maybe we can get to that later. So David, regarding that, you said in Love and the Postmodern Predicament that we will draw on the philosophical tradition alluded to at the outset to argue that beauty alone establishes the horizon for a genuine human existence, one that allows an encounter between man and the world that brings forth each in their integral wholeness. But Chris, in one of your books, All Things Beautiful, you have a whole chapter entitled Beauty Will Not Save the World, making explicit reference to the Dostoevsky quote that Solzhenitsyn is drawing on in his remarks. A relevant quote from that chapter. Nonetheless, without giving in to bitterness or desolation, we have to accept the fact that no beauty, however glorious, however excellent, can keep us or our world from our fate. This is the hard word of the cross. Beauty is vain, Proverbs 31:30, and all things, including the work of God in the world, have been subjected to futility, Romans 8:20. The hope we have, therefore, is a hope not in the beautiful, but for it. Beauty cannot redeem, but it can be redeemed.
I think I still agree with myself.
That's always a good experience. Yeah, when you hear something you said and you're not horrified. That doesn't happen to me very often. But how should we begin? There's a lot there that I think we could spend the whole hour just discussing what comes up in that great question. So how should we proceed?
Let me just throw in one point of view that I have that might make an entry point that you can both comment on. As an artist, I love art. I love going to museums, and there was a museum show in the Bay Area here in California, probably 20 years ago, called The Cult of Beauty. And it was a collection of just ravishing works from the pre-Raphaelites. And I went up there to see it, absolutely captivated. But about halfway through, I started noticing that I was feeling almost drunk with the beauty. And I began to feel a bit uncomfortable in my skin, uncomfortable in my faith with this. It seemed to me that capacity for beauty also is a capacity for an idolatry that I could very easily fall over into. So I don't know if that has anything to do with what seems like a disparate idea between what the two of you have said, but for what it's worth.
I suspect that there's less disagreement than might appear on the surface, but Chris, maybe you could explain a bit further why beauty won't save the world, just what you have in mind when you say that.
So that chapter, that book is what I call an aesthetic Christology. So I'm kind of working through poetry, film, architecture, paintings, thinking about what they have to say to us about Jesus, the truth that is in him, the goodness that is in him. And of course, my guiding kind of conviction is he does not have beauty that we should desire him, right? That there's something about the cross that's iconoclastic, right? It exposes the lies of what we have called beauty. Now, of course, and here's why I don't think we disagree much at all, if at all, is that I of course believe in the transcendentals and that they lead us into the uncreated beauty of God. What I'm really suggesting is that if you read The Idiot closely,
Yeah.
Dostoevsky is troubling that phrase. Mishkin doesn't actually say that line. It's reported that he said it, and he's asked if he said it and what he meant by it. And at least one way of reading that novel is a kind of exploration of whether or not that's true and in what ways it's true. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if we step back from the actual reading, which is what's guiding that chapter, I think there is some sense in which the beauty of God, the uncreated beauty of God, of course, will save the world.
Mm-hmm.
But what we call beauty, the things we've made, and may or may not participate in beauty itself, those things have to be redeemed. They're not themselves, in and of themselves, redeeming. So that's really what I'm after there, is a kind of arguing that the novel itself challenges that claim.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we're really asking which beauty, what does salvation mean, right? So that's what I'm after really in the chapter.
No, thank you. That's really, really illuminating, really helpful. And I think I do, it'll be more interesting if we can maybe pinpoint a disagreement, because basically I would agree with it, but I think there might be something that we could discuss. But the basic principle, I think, I would entirely agree that one of the things that I learned from Hunters from Balthazar that really has stayed with me is the order of the transcendentals.
Mm.
Well, I'll come back to the Christological and the divine beauty question, because that's the crucial one. But let me just put that off for a second. The order of the transcendentals, and Balthazar has a unique ordering: beauty first, and then goodness, then truth. And the way I read that is that beauty has the character of a kind of an invitation. It's a kind of an opening up of the world that then engages our freedom, that requires some kind of a response to the call that is occurring in some respect in beauty, and that response is the moment of the good, where we the moral action, faithful following. And the fruit of that then is an understanding and truth. So that's I think Balthazar has a unique way of looking at that. Now, what's one of the things that about that order that I think bears on this particular point is you can see what it would mean to fail to respond. So you're invited, but you don't accept the invitation. You just sort of you wallow in the beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there, I think that is precisely what it would mean to say that beauty becomes idolatrous. It opens you up, but you, in a sense, just thrill with that experience. You thrill in that experience of being opened up as an end in itself, rather than recognizing it as an opening that's taking you out of yourself, inviting you into dramatic action and fidelity and the rest. So that would be the idolatrous moment. And I think one of the things that would be interesting to hear your take on this particular point. To my mind, it seems that some people might read that point that I just made and say that's when beauty, there's too much beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to maybe start with beauty, but let it go. But I think it's more subtle than that. I think that sort of idolatrous indulgence is a betrayal of beauty. It's not just a betrayal of the good that you're meant to, but you're actually falsifying the proper experience of beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important, because otherwise we end up viewing beauty principally as a kind of a temptation.
Yes.
As opposed to an invitation, a proper invitation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've talked for too long already, so I'm going.
No, that's really helpful, actually.
The divine beauty part, I'll let unfold further in the conversation here.
Yeah, so many thoughts. One is, you've just taught me something about what I've been doing. In that, I mentioned already a couple of times this book I'm trying to finish, which is behind schedule, of course. Which I take as a mark that I'm a serious scholar, right? That's a sign that
that's right.
You really are important when you're behind on everything. But I had followed that Balthasarian order of things. The first book is Aesthetic Christology. Then I do one on a biblical Christology of the question of the good. And this last one is the question of the truth. And
wow. Yeah.
I would like to say I purposely did that. But I realize now I just read enough Balthasar that got into me, and I didn't actually notice that's what I was doing. But that is exactly it, right? That beauty opens us up, calls us to be present to this goodness that is available to us, to be true as it is true. And a refusal to do that is a betrayal of beauty's own vocation. I think that's exactly right. I think a story might help us, like we could work around it. And I shared this, Karen, at the conference we did together, that Bulgakov has this experience of the Sistine Madonna that begins his conversion back to the faith and launches him on the path that we know him for walking. But much later in his life, he reflects on that painting. He goes back to see it again. He goes back to the museum for the first time since that experience had happened to him all those years ago. And when he sees it the second time, he's grieved by by the kind of beauty it gives. And he no longer sees, he says, the living face of the Mother of God. He sees something tempting, something, and he has this line: how could anyone ever pray before this painting?
Wow.
Right. So, but what's particularly interesting to me about it is that it was that very painting, right, that made him pray in the first place.
Yeah.
And yet when he sees it again, kind of out of that moment, and Robert Jensen was a mentor for me. One of the things Jens would say is beauty is goodness throwing its weight around. It's playing on kabod, right? Playing on glory.
Yeah.
Beauty is goodness throwing its weight around. Yeah. And so I wonder if we need, and I know this sets you up for a lot you could say, but I wonder if we need to think of beauty not as a thing, not as some reified static thing, but as a happening. And that when beauty is happening, as it did for Bulgakov early on in the vision of the painting, it's a movement of the Spirit. It is a happening of God, and so is true and good. But if it is objectified, if it becomes a thing,
right,
then it is something else. It's no longer beautiful in that sense. Maybe there's a way into it.
Absolutely. No, that sounds great. And I was going to ask you, what accounts for the difference between the first experience and the second, but I think your explanation there, and I think that's something that resonates with all of us. We know when we're sort of seeing something, seeing through something to what it's revealing, that there's something quite dramatic about that, or simply looking at it. The distinction Jean-Luc Marion makes between the idol and the icon.
Icon, yeah, absolutely.
And the icon is what we're seeing through, and that's going to give it a kind of dynamic dimension, a happening, as you put it. And that's also what I had in mind with the sense of a call, of an invitation. An invitation doesn't mean anything unless you respond to it. It's not something you just frame. You receive an invitation, you frame and you put up on your wall. You've killed it.
Yes.
So you respond to it, and you're fulfilling its meaning. This actually then leads to an interesting question. Is that what's the relationship between that movement and hope? So you said, I can't recall the passage that was quoted. You don't hope in beauty, or you hope for beauty.
For it, yeah.
That might be. It seems to me there's something of a hope structure already in this response. That you're, precisely because it's pointing you beyond to something else, that I think is is important. I'd be interested to hear your comments on that.
No, I think that's exactly. I think
add one phrase to that, though, or one other dimension is it. Beauty, it seems to me, is especially connected to hope for a reason that was also in the question that Karen read, and that is, it really does seem to be able to break through anything. To sort of, there's nobody in the world that doesn't respond to beauty, and they can be cynical about goodness and truth, but they always respond to beauty. That's a point a teacher once made in class. And made a very big impression on me. It strikes me as true, and there's something of the mercy of God that has to be seen in that, I think.
That's right, and I think there's a distinction here to be made between something we've made, and probably to be more precise with the sentence that Karen quoted from the book, I think it's probably closer to what I mean to say something like, we cannot hope in the beauty we have made or the things we've called beautiful.
Mhm.
We have hope for the beauty that God gives, something like that. That's probably closer to what I'm really trying to say. But I think there's a distinction here between, like, when something has happened to me that afterward I call beautiful, I think I'm defenseless before that.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the names I have for that thing that reduces me to tears, awe, is the beautiful. And in that sense, I think it is always good. That is always a happening of the spirit. That is transcendental, right? But I think there are things we call beautiful that aren't quite. Here's another story that I think about all the time. The Mako Fujimura, the painter, he tells a story about right at the end of his time training in the Hanga, he has painted a piece, and his doctoral supervisor walks in and sees it and says, Mako, that painting is so beautiful, it's terrifying. And Mako has this realization, and you really need to hear him tell the story, but he has this realization that he had made something beautiful, even though he didn't believe in God and didn't believe in the beautiful really at all, and realized that something had happened from him and now was happening to him that he couldn't understand how it would be possible given what he believed. And as he says, the way I was living at the time, the cruelty and faithlessness I was living with. So I think that if we call that beauty, that has to be good. I just want to say that there is this other dimension of things we've made. And maybe we need to call, to distinguish beauty from beauty here. And I don't know how you would do that, but I think that's the question for me. I am concerned about not so much what is actually good in itself, us loving it too much, but of us calling something beautiful that actually is not.
Right.
And, like, that's more the issue, I think.
Understood. And that's really helpful too. I was struck by the title of the book that Karen elevated there, Surprised by God. That this notion of surprise in beauty that has to be essential to it. And maybe that's a crucial dimension here. You mentioned the way you characterize it was really helpful, that an experience that you have where you move to tears and afterwards you call it beautiful. That's very different. I mean, imagine sort of going into that experience and say, okay, I'm going to have an experience of the beautiful. Let me set something up so that I have an experience of beauty. That's a very different thing. And what's missing from it is precisely the surprise. And etymologically, what does surprise mean? You're being taken, out of yourself by something that's not in your control. You're being taken up and taken out of yourself. That seems to be essential to this experience of beauty, and why when we manufacture an experience of beauty. I mean, this raises an interesting question, Karen, about a museum.
Yes.
Is a museum precisely domesticated beauty in this way that's that would be questionable? Clearly there were in the 19th century these interesting questions raised about museums. I think it's ambiguous there because even Michigan had the experience in seeing a painting in a museum. That I think one can be surprised by beauty, even you would say in spite of one's attempt to manufacture the experience. That certainly does happen. I think we all have had some.
That's right.
I want to throw something in here before I lose it. I think I'm hearing that there's something that is very helpful to me right now, is that there is a difference between surprise and innovation. I think our current culture has gotten drunk on innovation. Everything has to be novelty after novelty after. The only thing that will catch our attention is novelty now. But that means that you've lost the element of surprise, because novelty is something that you go after. Novelty is something that you can pump yourself up to or create or come up. And that's what's happened to museums. They're not interested in beauty or surprise anymore. They're only interested in novelty. Is this the first time this has ever been done? Then it's going to get in a museum, even if it's a cow cut in half and drenched in formaldehyde.
Yeah.
Because it hasn't been done before, it's art.
Yeah.
No,
Right.
but surprise is an altogether different thing. And I want to add to this another element of this. One of the things that was going around Twitter recently was a set of 3 pictures of 3 different churches, an Eastern Orthodox, ravishingly beautiful art in the Eastern Orthodox Church, a Catholic church with all the ravishingly beautiful art, and then a Protestant church with the white walls and the plain cross in the center. And the people who were commenting on this were kind of triumphalistically saying, "What happened? You know, why have we gotten rid of all this beautiful art?" As though there was no opportunity for the surprise of this, the beauty of Christ happening in a spare Protestant church.
Right.
So I'll throw that out for conversation as well.
Yeah. So who should begin here?
You go, David. I want to hear your thoughts on this. I have so many. My head is swirling because I
No, it is. I mean, this is great. So I mean, innovation. There's nothing more boring than constant innovation, and being surprised. The key is something can really surprise you only if it's original in the fullest meaning of that sense. Original doesn't mean simply it hasn't been done before, because something can be novel and not be original at all. Original means going back to the origin, sort of drawing on the origins, so that what surprises us in it is this welling up of a depth that we hadn't seen before. So T.S. Eliot has an excellent essay on, I think it's called "Tradition in the Individual Artist," I believe is the title. It's some version of that, where he says that the most original and innovative artists are always the ones who attempt to be traditional, who draw from, who graft themselves onto the vine, you might say, who draw on the actual real living tradition and attempt in a way to become transparent to this tradition that, because it's a tradition, is moving forward. It of itself, it has the force and energy to innovate. So the more deeply one enters into this movement, the more original one's work becomes, but it's without the intention. It seems to me that's drawing from the source is really what surprises. And with respect to the churches, that's I would. So I guess 2 comments. One is, I do think it is devastating to Christianity to forfeit the beautiful, to leave it behind. That's the first point. The idea that somehow beauty is irrelevant. I think that's contrary to the very meaning of the incarnation. That being said, there can be something extraordinarily beautiful in a simplicity and a kind of austere drawing on the source that I was just talking about, and there can be something in the kind of overindulgence in surfaces and stimulation that can smother the original. So it's not simply the case that the more ornamentation, the more beautiful something is, and the more true to the Christian spirit. I wouldn't say that at all, but I would say, a kind of simple iconoclastic principle without the proper qualification does lose something essential to the incarnation, I think.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree, and I think we need like 10 hours of conversation around this, because I think we have to affirm both that space time matters, what we do with our bodies matter, where we put them matters.
Yeah.
And one way of saying it might be, there has to be something to see through.
Yeah.
And that means there has to be something to see, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have to have something to look at in order to look past it or through it.
Mm-hmm.
And that reminds me of Illich's notion of guarding the eye, right? So his account of the kind of the history of the shift in vision, the way that we, and I mentioned this too, Karen, in that talk. He has a great little essay called "Guarding the Eye in the Age of the Show," and contending that how we see is who we are, and that cuts both ways, both in terms of how we take in what we should not take in or what should not be taken in, and how we are taken through what presents God to us. So I think if we take that line, then the difference between those churches, Karen, that you've mentioned, is not inherent in them, in their structure or their ornamentation, as David just said, but in whether or not my vision approaches them rightly, and whether or not those spaces are fitted to where I am. So I think there are two problems here to name, at least. One is, I think there are vocational differences. There's, if space is spare and I'm a monk, it's fitting.
Yeah.
But it's appropriate. It wouldn't be appropriate. And this is why we have all these stories of saints walking into churches that are highly ornamented and being despairing of it, disgusted by it, right? I mean, think of the stories of St. Francis and right on down the line. But there is also another time and place in which, the beauty of a cathedral, Hagia Sophia or whatever it might be, is allowing me precisely in its grandeur to see through to the grandeur of God. Both are entirely appropriate and I think entirely fitting in themselves, as long as it's fitted to the people who are gathered there and their vocation. And I think that's something that might shift for some of us seasonally. Like liturgically, we have a Lenten season. So if we think about that Protestant space as a Lenten architecture, a Lenten, it's a kind of beauty, or at least it can be, but you can't live in Lent. It can't always be Lent and never Christmas, never Easter, right? So I wonder if some of our problem is we're too stationary.
Yeah.
As worshipers.
And just to add one qualifier there that occurred to me as you were talking, and I what you said is really excellent, really helpful. And I was thinking about the monk. I've had some opportunities to spend some time in monasteries in a few occasions, and one of the things that has struck me is that they can be extraordinarily beautiful. In fact, they are always extraordinarily beautiful, right, in their simplicity, to the extent that they're true to the vocation. And so, one might listen to what you were saying and interpret this as saying that sometimes beauty is important, sometimes it isn't. Yeah. Whereas I think what you're saying is there are two faces of beauty.
Yes.
And one has this, it's the beauty of the cross, which is when he has no beauty in him, as the
right,
as the Psalm says. I think it's the Psalm. What passage is that?
Well, that's Isaiah 53.
Isaiah, there you go.
That's exactly what I am saying, right? That beauty has to do with how I'm present and whether the space and time is fitted to what needs to happen there. And so, to me, beauty is very, very dynamic. I mean, it belongs to the Spirit, right?
Yeah.
And to the triune God. So it's in that way, there has to be something there to see, as I said, to see through it.
Yeah.
But it needs to be fitted to what that space is and what it's for. I think where you start to get something, let's call it false beauty, is where something is highly ornamented or is beautified, but it's unfittingly beautified.
Yeah, right.
That's what I'm trying to get at. So definitely don't think that beauty sometimes doesn't matter. Yeah. I think wherever the good is and the true is, the beauty must be, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So I completely agree on that point. I just think that beauty has a lot to do with what's fitting here for these people under these circumstances.
That's right. And the fitting is one of the words.
I think when I brought it up, I wasn't specifically thinking of the architecture, especially in the Protestant environment, but more what you were saying, Chris, earlier about how we see as who we are, or earlier when you said beauty as a happening. Something can happen in your life that upon later reflection, you see the beauty of it, but maybe what happened was extraordinarily painful, difficult experience that you went through. So for me, I think that if I were, and this is just me, so I worship in Protestant churches, and if I were surrounded by all that beauty all the time, I think I would not be able to fully enter into the beauty that I see in Christ when I'm in the sanctuary, or when I'm at home, doing whatever it is I do in my private time, my quiet time at home. I have tried the thing with icons because I talk to a lot of people who are either Eastern Orthodox or Catholic, and I find it distracting. So I don't think it's necessarily just the architecture, but it's how we enter into worship. Now, for people who have grown up in that tradition, probably that beauty is an entry into worship for them. But for people who have not grown up in that tradition, it might be a hindrance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that. So I was thinking of about something that Chris was saying that I think then would bear on the point that you're making, Karen. That if these are different faces of beauty, and one is a Lenten face, and one is a an Easter face or something. Why would we call the Lenten face that austerity? What would we mean if we said that that's still an experience of beauty? So what exactly is the essence of beauty that's going on there? And it seems to me one of the things that one would say is that you are moved by. There's something that moves you. You're moved by something, and it is something that you see or happens through your sight in any event. To use some of the qualifiers, Chris, that you were adding, and it seems to me that that's got to be part of any experience of worship, whatever it is that. And why is that important? It seems to me that if you take the beautiful out of the good and the true, you have just the good and the true. I think this is a sort of a hypothesis, but it seems to me the danger is that human activity and human life, it's immanentized. We think of things almost too strictly in terms of human effort, human doing. Something happens because I make it happen. I'm praying. It's me moving. I am addressing myself to God. I am. It's a human. It's the individual person's initiation of the relationship to God. It's God becomes an object of my thoughts and in my prayers and my needs and so forth. And the crucial thing about beauty is that this is why I think the surprise is so crucial.
I agree.
It trumps that. It moves us before we move ourselves. So we're taken up into a movement, and it seems to me that's just properly Christian. We can say Abba in the Spirit. It's not just we say it and then the Spirit comes. We're moved first.
Yes.
And the primacy of beauty has something to do with our being moved first.
Yeah, completely agree. I think the more you talk, David, the more I'm seeing a kind of emerge, almost an account of beauty as what is fitting, what invites us, right? In its fittingness, precisely in its fittingness, it invites us, but surprisingly, so that we're already moving before we realize we are, right? We're kind of already taken in. We're already raptured, before we know we are. And I think what I'm adding to that is simply that we cannot know ahead of time how that will happen, and we can't ahead of time list, have a kind of exhaustive list of things that can be seen, things that can be smelled, things that can be tasted, things that can be heard. These count as beautiful, and we know ahead of time whatever's going to happen to you will come from this list. That's what I'm getting at. So like in the Idiot, the painting that is most moving for them all is Holbein's dead, the dead body of Christ, or the body of the dead Christ. And of course, which is horrifying, and they say so.
Yeah.
And yet there it's beautiful because of whose body it is,
Right.
and what else we know about what's coming before and after that moment that the painting holds up for us, right? So it's not just a cadaver, it's Jesus's body.
Right.
Because we know it's his body, then that painting can and does reach out to us, right? It takes us in.
Yeah.
But and it might even do that. I mean, I would be prepared to say that painting could do that for someone who didn't know Jesus' story.
Yeah.
Because it is a witness to Jesus' story, whether we know it or not, and has something in it. I mean, in that sense, I'm very traditional. I think there's something quote unquote objective about beauty, but I don't think that objectivity is something we can capture or something that we can catalog. And I think there's something here, Karen, really closely related to what you were saying about the difference between innovation and that when we think of the beautiful as something that's catalogable, right? That's, I think, where the mistake is. Like, and then creating a kind of false hierarchy. I mean, I love hierarchy in the Dionysian sense, but the way we tend to think of kind of a scale of better to not so good, and imagining that we could order beauty in that way in the world and say, this cathedral is beautiful in a way that tent down the street where they're having revival is not. Well, no. You can't know that ahead of time because you can't know all of the dynamics, the fittingness that's going to happen, the convergence that's going to happen in that moment for that person. But I do think looking back, we will see beauty was there, right? So beauty is not just a name for experience.
Yeah.
It's the recognition of something that really was there, that was perfectly fitted to what needed to happen. So something like that, I think, is what I would want to say.
Yeah.
Sorry, I went on there.
Yeah, I agree, but it's interesting that something I hesitate a little bit because it seems to me, when you set up a home, in these few conversations I've had with you, Karen, I get a sense you have a beautiful home. One can sort of see that through the screen here.
You're only seeing this little slice.
Yeah. But I mean, it's interesting. We do have a sense of we want to make the home beautiful, and we wouldn't want to say. So I'm going to just for the sake of argument, kind of push the point that you made, Chris, further and say, well, I have no idea what is going to be beautiful, so I'm going to throw everything on the floor. Maybe today that's going to be beautiful, or I'm going to try. You know what I mean? That you just sort of you think that in a way it doesn't really matter. It seems to me we do have some sense that there are some things that are more beautiful than others. And I don't know that excludes the point that you made, because I also agree with what you said, that it's unpredictable, and that something I remember this movie. I should watch it again because all my friends were disturbed by it, but I remember being really struck, and I think it's a movie I probably shouldn't recommend to people, but because of the content. But do you recall the movie? I think it's called American Beauty from I don't know, a few years ago. But what I have in mind now is this: that there was a moment of a plastic bag floating in the air, and that became this extraordinary experience of grace and a kind of moving through life. So it became a revelation. And it seems to me absolutely that sort of thing is possible, but I wouldn't want that to mean therefore there's no.
Yes.
Yeah. And how do we put those together? I guess
I think that's exactly right. And why? Yeah. It's hopefully we will eventually stumble into something we genuinely disagree about. It'll be more interesting for everybody if we can. But I think, again, I agree with you. And it's part of what I was trying to say by I'm very traditional here. I do think there's something objective. I do think that we can order our lives to beauty.
Yeah.
But I think this thing we're talking about as the beautiful that happens to us, will surprise us, which means it comes at an angle.
Yeah.
And so but I don't mean to suggest something like, we kind of live each morning starting over as if we can't tell anything about what is good and true and beautiful. I think it's something like, if I can put it like this, I think in the reading of scripture, that is always good and true. And then there are moments in which
Yeah,
you
right.
read a text and suddenly it's alive to you in a way you couldn't have known before,
Yeah.
or didn't expect to know in that moment. I don't think those are at odds with each other. I think there's something about ordering your life to the truth of Scripture sets you up to be taken by surprise by
Yeah.
it. And that I would want to say something more like that about all
Yeah.
beauty.
Well, okay, so we just landed on my little gig here, which is
Okay.
the design principles, the elements and principles of art, which is why you don't just take everything and throw it on the floor and say, okay, well, maybe that's beautiful, or why I think that much of abstract expressionism was a travesty, because it's just, let's throw some paint on a canvas and cha-ching, go make money on it. Because it's forsaking the principles that are built into the universe that are not a set of rules. You can't paint with a set of rules, because every artist has a different aesthetic and a different heart, and the way their hands move and the way their minds work and the way their eyes see is unique to every person. So if you tried to catalog everything that is beautiful and have a set of rules, then you would end up with things that are very stilted or very predictable coming out of every artist's hands, whether it would be music or writing or painting.
Tried. Yeah.
Right? But if you take the elements, which are just the things of which the art is made up, and over the centuries, they've decided that mostly those are line, size, shape, texture, color, value, and lines and direction. Those are the things of which most paintings consist. But then, and this is true of music as well, the principles are unity, harmony, contrast, dominance, repetition, variation, gradation, and balance. And when an artist works, even if they're not conscious of those principles, they're being played out in the work if they're trying to create something beautiful, because those principles are written into our souls, I think, and they're written into the universe. I've talked to a lot of physicists and chemists and biologists, and I've given them that list, and they've said, oh yes, we see that in our science. So if that's something that is true even at the particle level, then it is also true for us as human beings. So it's not a set of rules, but it is a set of intersecting principles that are basically relationships. So it's the relationships that make something beautiful. I can go to a museum and I can see a beautiful work by John Singer Sargent or Bouguereau, or so many artists that I can think of that I really like. Delacroix, guys like that. Okay, beautiful color and everything. But I can also walk through a village where there's walls that are, maybe the doors are rusted and the walls have been scraped down by generations of rain and and that also is beautiful, and I'll take a picture of it and I'll save it, because that texture is entrancing to me, and I can think, oh, that would be beautiful someplace else. Like you say, in context, everything has to be in context, right? And I think that's true of our lives as well. I mean, we go through times that are brutalizing, but what that brutality does in our lives later is it scrapes off some rough edges and it leaves behind a little rust. But all of that, it's like the Velveteen Rabbit. You get worn off, and maybe it becomes more beautiful than in the beginning when everything was all shiny. I mean, I remember when I don't paint so much anymore because I spend so much time on the channel. But when I was painting, it was always a death knell to me if somebody would say, "Oh, Karen, that's so pretty." No. I have to work on it some more then, because pretty is not where it's at, right? There's something different between beauty and prettiness.
For sure. I mean, that reminds me of everyone, I'm sure, who's watching this is thinking of that, C.S. Lewis's recounting of Coleridge's experience at the waterfall, right? The waterfall is not pretty, it's sublime, right?
Yeah.
And I do think sublimity is probably a word that should have come up already. I mean, so much
Yeah.
of what
Yeah.
we've said here really is about beauty as sublimity.
Hmm.
And but I don't think that exhausts beauty. And I guess
Yeah.
that's the point I'm making. I don't think you can exhaust beauty. The other side of saying it's unpredictable is to say it's inexhaustible. It there's more resource in it than there is in us, and so it will. That's one of the reasons, maybe the reason it can always surprise us, right? And I maybe putting it that way rather than talking about its unpredictability puts the emphasis on the beauty rather than on our making of it, right? Because one of the things I do want to avoid here, and this brings us, Karen, back to that point about the Protestant space and the distraction that you experience with icons. Like I think that's many people's experience and obviously needs to be taken seriously. I also think there's a way in which spaces need to be true to what their calling is. Yeah. I often with my students will say, if because I do a lot, I teach in a seminary, so I'm teaching pastors and people who are working in churches, right? That there's something disturbing about a space that wouldn't be recognized as a church if you weren't there to talk to people about what it is. Mm-hmm. Right. But I want to say that and also say we cannot have some kind of pre-catalog list of, here are the 7 things that have to be in a space in order for that space to be properly church. I think we can and need to say all of that, right? That there are things that need to be present, but that because the one who is present is living, right? That we can't say ahead of time. We can't have that under our thumb. And this is why, Karen, when you're listing all of those elements, I'm agreeing, but saying yes, and right. Like I think all of that's true. Yeah. And now we're right at the threshold of where the really interesting stuff begins. Like all of that's true, but it just gets us to the threshold of what's actually going to happen when the beauty shows up.
Maybe a way to think of this is so to take the principles that Karen listed. These are principles and they're not rules. So it's not as if you follow the rules and you produce something beautiful. We all recognize that. On the other hand, totally disregarding the rules never works either, or rarely works. I guess you can never say never, but and we're all familiar with the advice to artists, learn all the rules and then forget them, that kind of thing. But the point, it seems to me the point is that there are these universal principles, but Karen used the word context. In any given case, they come together uniquely. And in that coming together, there's a unity that shines through and gives life to. Chris used the word, reading scripture suddenly in a moment, you might, it might have a life it didn't have before. I mean, we have that experience also looking at a painting or so, but it's not, and that in a way, it goes beyond the simple configuration of the principles, but it includes them. So that might be a way of saying these principles are important and they're always going to have some bearing on what's beautiful, but in their coming together in this particular way for this particular person, even in this particular context, a new sort of light can shine through them. Mm-hmm. So, and that gives us a bit of a both and. I have to say I was tasked with writing an essay on beauty in Plato's Symposium, and so spent a long time with dialogue that I had always loved anyway, and something of this struck me that I had never seen before. It was such an enriching experience, but I realized that there's something about this play of order and disorder that is at work in that dialogue, and it struck me that I think one of the things that Plato is trying to communicate in that dialogue is that beauty has something to do with the inexhaustible capacity to give order to whatever it is. So that you might have something that disorder enters into it, but beauty takes even that up into an expression that surprises us with a deeper sense of order than was initially conceived. So this kind of inexhaustible capacity to bring order to disorder is part of the meaning of beauty too, I think.
Well,
Yes.
one of the ways that I've understood Jordan Peterson's concept of order and chaos
Hmm.
is that if you imagine, so order and chaos are in a circle, and order is over here, and there's a line, and then chaos is over here. That line between order and chaos is where all the interesting things happen. That's where you have one foot in order so that you're you have a stability, but then you can put one foot over into chaos and see what's over there and find the treasures that the dragon is hiding in the chaos, bring it back out of chaos into order to revivify and beautify and complexify the order that's there. And there's this continual process that's going on. And I think that that Peterson's work on this over the years, as he has contemplated that, he's gotten closer and closer to seeing that that's the work of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
It's work of Christ to bridge the chaos and the order, to keep bringing that, to keep showing us the beauty that's residing in the chaos. And sometimes you can reach over there, you have one foot in the order and you reach over one. Sometimes you just fall over into the chaos, and it's not, maybe through no fault of your own, you're just there. And everything around you is horrendous and chaotic, and the world is falling apart. And yet, if you keep your eye on the idea that even there Christ will meet you, then there's beauty there that you can bring back into your world, and your world can become ordered again.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about the principles of art that I find so fascinating is that they work together relationally in a way that, if you really meditate on it, is quite transformational. So, for example, you can't have unity in a painting if you don't have dominance.
Mm-hmm.
So there has to be an element of dominance in a work for there to be unity. Now, it would take a long time to explain that, but just accept it as an axiom for right now, right? In the same way, part of the way that you bring harmony to a painting is through using the color and the value in a way that makes a harmonious whole. Or you can have repetition going on. You can have non-identical repetition going on in a work, and that will bring unity. That will bring harmony. But unity and harmony are brought about through the intersection of all the other principles working together. And you can work your way all through all the principles. And if you do the mathematics of it, you end up with millions and millions and millions of possibilities with every stroke of paint that goes down. So if you had to think your way through all those principles, you'd never paint anything. It'd be over. And I'm sure it's the same way when you're writing a book. Every word, there's how many words in the English language, and every time you write a word in a sentence, you're choosing amongst all those words, but something is guiding you to that next word so that it fits the context of what you're trying to say. And it's the same way with making a painting or making a piece of music. And when Peterson talks about order and chaos, he talks about that moment when you're listening to, say, a Beethoven symphony, when all these different things that have been going on in the symphony, all of a sudden they all line up at one place, and you get this sense of the wholeness and the unity of the piece. And that's where the beauty shows up. And I think there's something very powerful in that idea.
Yeah, I want to ask a question of David. I want to hear him muse on something. So these next three thoughts are a bit scattered, but you'll see, I think, by the end of them, kind of how they relate, Karen, to what you just said. I'm reminded of Thelonious Monk's version of Blessed Assurance.
Mm-hmm.
And if anyone who's listening who hasn't heard it, like, pause us, jump on YouTube, listen to it. I genuinely don't know. I think I do. I have a hunch, but I don't know for sure whether or not that would be so moving for me if I hadn't grown up with that song played differently.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up. I mean, that song was, present in my life weekly. My wife grew up in the same circles I did, and it was clean, rather played rather speedily, major notes. It was a reassuring song. The way he plays it, there's lament in it. There's pain and lapses. It's broken in, and I'm deeply, deeply moved by it in a way the song never moved me before. But as I said, I don't know and I don't think it would. I don't think his version of that song would be beautiful to me if I didn't bring to the hearing of it a lifetime of having already heard that song otherwise. But I bring it up, Karen, because that's an example of not moving from chaos to order, but from order toward what you're calling chaos to bring beauty. You're moving away from order, at least and order, to something else. So that's one thought, and I feel free to jump back at that, Karen, however you like. My question for David.
Just to clarify, that kind of thing, jazz is a perfect example of the way the intersections weave together in context to produce beauty. And jazz is a perfect example of that. So, because there is an order in jazz, it's not a stultified, rigid order, but it's that order of the principles operating together to produce beauty. And you can't do that without all the different musicians tuning into each other relationally to see the context of each note as they're going. So it's like a constant data compression of tuning into each other at each moment where they're at for that kind of thing to materialize.
So the question I had for David was this: it seemed, and I'm working right now with Balthasar and Dionysius on knowing and unknowing. And it seems to me that the line is not from chaos to order, but from being or knowing and being across the threshold into unknowing, right? The God who cannot be known. And Balthasar has this astounding, it's one of my favorite chapters in Balthasar's work, his reflection on Dionysius' style in Glory of the Lord. And he says that what's required, and I wish I could quote it because it's beautiful, even in translation, it's gorgeous, that what's required of the theologian is poise. The knowing of God that Dionysius is calling for us to share is poised at that threshold between knowing and unknowing. So I'd like to introduce that concept in here, and I'd love to hear you just kind of muse on that, David. Like what you think either Balthasar means by poise, or just where does that take you personally?
Yeah. The thought that occurs to me listening to both of you speak about order and chaos and in which direction you're moving. One of the most interesting theories of beauty that I've ever read, I find it the most compelling, is Friedrich Schiller, actually. I don't think he gets enough attention, but a couple of notions. I won't expound them very long here, but just freedom in appearance is one way he puts it, and then form overcoming form, and he gives a description of he draws two lines, and one is just a straight line, and one sort of follows the same. It gets from point A to point B, but it does it in this sort of wavy manner. And he says, which of these two lines is more beautiful? He says, we would all agree that the curved line is more beautiful. It's interesting. You see this when in homes that usually if you have a beautiful facade, there's typically the path to the front of the home curves. It's not just straight. And what's his point is that it's freedom in appearance. There would be a lack of freedom if it was just a rigid, you might say, servitude to the order of a line. But it would also be disturbing if it were the simple disregard of of the order. And what you see in the curved line in the simplest character, simplest exhibition possible, is something that in a way exceeds the original order, but recovers it. It ends up being constrained by the order in a way that makes the departure essential and not accidental. It makes it crucial, and that simple principle. So it seems to me one of the ways we could maybe describe what beauty is, and this brings us back to also to the notion of the event-like character. Um, it could be something like, the power to overcome disorder.
Mm.
So that the disorder is not fought against, it's allowed and then overcome from within. And that you think of a jazz rendition, you in a way bend a melody, but that bending of it doesn't break it. It actually is recovered in a way that you see it's even more. It gives it a depth and a richness. So and there is an event in that. It is a kind of an achievement. And what's extraordinary here is you can't help but hear uh, the Son of God entering into becoming, sin for our sake, for the sake of our redemption, ultimately. I mean, and I think that's not accidental. But I think it works quite powerfully just as a theory of what beauty is, and it seems to capture something of both of what you were saying.
Hmm. Yeah, I wonder if we could, to use the language of the Transcendentals, if beauty is the power of goodness to overcome what is not good, disorder,
Mhm, mhm,
untrue, and make it true.
mhm.
Right, like that. I
Yeah,
think that's
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 nice.
quite
That's
good.
nice.
Quite
Yeah,
good.
manifestly.
Mm.
Yeah, and right. That's interesting.
And that
That
manifest language, of course, that's Jensen's. That's what he's getting at with beauty as goodness throwing its weight around. Like there's a
mhm, mhm,
manifesting happening. Yeah.
mhm.
Well, David, I know that your time is limited and you have to go in just a couple of minutes, but I wonder
It's
if
my
it would
it's my
be,
son's 17th birthday
oh
today,
my
so
goodness.
we've got to schedule.
I wonder if it would be possible to get the two of you together again, because I think this thing you just brought up is so powerful and fits in so well with what we've been talking about. And I think it fits in with this idea that so many of us have loved ones that are on a path that is painful to watch. Um, and yet, is that part of the beauty of the curved path rather than the most direct path? And and I would love to talk with the two of you about that. And because what you're saying, I mean, works right into quantum physics and everything else. And that
It
curved
is.
path idea, that's so powerful. And then the whole idea that you brought up, Chris, about Thelonious Monk's version of Blessed Assurance. There is so much of art that is beautiful because of the pain that we see in it. And what is it about that in our lives that maybe we don't want to go after it, but it comes as a surprise, and yet there's a beauty in that surprise. And I would really love to dig deeper into that. Is that a possibility? We could plan a future
Oh,
event.
yeah, I'd be very happy to.
Yeah.
Okay,
That'd
cool.
be
Very,
wonderful.
very good. Well, happy 17th birthday to your son. Today's
Yes.
Yes.
today's my 32nd anniversary.
Oh, congratulations.
And and I don't know what's going on for you,
Yeah.
Chris.
Yeah.
Oh, my life is terribly boring at the moment, but I'm glad for it to be. It's been too exciting for too long.
So it's been a delight to talk to both of you. And if you have any new publications or anything like that that you want me to put in the description section, just drop me an email and I'll tuck it in there so people can find you. I will put in both of your websites for people as well. So thank you again very much for joining me, and I hope you have a wonderful week, and we'll get together sometime in the near future.
Thank you, Karen. David, it was great to meet you. Thank you for today.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation. It took me by surprise. I didn't know we were going to talk about beauty, but it was enriching. So thanks.
Bless you. Bless your son too.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.